Freebies shouted the headlines when the bus rides were made free for women. As of January 2024, 6 Indian states offer free bus rides for women: Delhi, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Kerala, Telangana, and Punjab. These schemes are intended to increase women's socio-economic participation and give them more freedom to travel. But the freebie chant never died down in each state this was rolled out. I heard it louder where I live in Bengaluru, Karnataka state. Some states rolled it out for city bus services, some did it statewide, including the intercity bus services. The economic argument I understood. It puts pressure on bus corporation earnings and makes them fiscally irresponsible, and many other reasons that we can go into and understand more about. But it is the other side I wanted to hear. I've been wanting to understand, are these free bus travel for women worth it? How do I quantify worth? Who gets to define worth? Karnataka's Shakti scheme reached about 100 crore zero fare tickets costing 2300 crores for women in just 5 months, as against the 9 months that was budgeted for. Tamil Nadu, on the other hand, was one of the first few states which provided free bus transport for women after Delhi and Punjab. Citizen, Consumer and Civic Action Group, or CAG, from Chennai surveyed about 3,000 women across 6 cities in Tamil Nadu to understand the impact of the fare-free public transport scheme for women launched by the Tamil Nadu government. The study found that women were able to save an average of about 600 to 800 rupees per month as a result of this scheme. And additionally, what they did with that is interesting. These expenses were predominantly invested in the family. Sumana Narayanan was a senior researcher at CAG when she did this survey. I spoke to her to understand if this exercise that is running in multiple states now was worth the effort and what might be the future of this scheme based on the study that she did in Tamil Nadu. Sumana, thanks for joining us on the OoruLabs podcast to talk about this study. One of the first things I wanted to kind of go through with is why did you want to do this study, and what was the reasons behind wanting to understand the success of this scheme?
Thank you for having me. So I think for us, the question arose, we're working on mobility and public transport and sustainable transport, and obviously buses is, that's a key component of that, because that's the most affordable mode of transport for a lot of people, even more than things like metro. So anything related to buses was important for us. But more than that, when this scheme came, a year after the scheme, there was still a lot of noise in the public space, a lot of discussion and narrative around how the scheme is unfair, and other people are subsidizing a group of commuters, and how is that fair? And it was very interesting to hear that. And then soon after, Karnataka brought out their, they were talking about having a similar scheme. So all of that noise amplified even more. So at that point, we said, okay, no scheme is perfect. I'm sure there are pluses and minuses. Let's look at the scheme. It's run for 2 years in Tamil Nadu. What have they done? What worked? How did it help? Did it not help? What are the women saying? Because they are supposed to be the beneficiaries. And therefore, what then can we say about the scheme? Because in other countries, there are examples of free public transit for everybody. There are cities and few really small countries like Luxembourg. But this is a very particular group. And in a country like India, where these spaces can be quite complex, and there's always a debate on where you're spending your public money. It's taxpayer money. So all of that. So we thought it was a good time. This scheme having run for nearly 2 years at that point when we thought about this, it was a good time to take stock?
Yeah, I think I got interested only because of all the backlash that this was doing. And I found that you're one of the few people who did a quantitative study as well, because I've seen a lot of news reports which goes and talks to people and tries to understand why they are doing what they're doing. But yours was one of the few that had any numbers at all, right? To measure, because I was looking for that. I was trying to understand how does anybody quantify these benefits? How do we look at those? Because the qualitative is definitely there. You can talk to people, you can get their feelings. But so then what came out when you did this? You did this for, I think, how many cities did you do this in?
So we looked at 6 cities across Tamil Nadu, and we were trying to cover, metropolises as well as smaller cities. So we had Chennai, of course, Coimbatore, Salem, Tiruvarur, Tiruvannamalai, so slightly smaller towns there, and Tirunelveli.
And what were the results of this study broadly? What are the surprising standouts that came out?
So first the methodology was that we spoke to 500 women in each city, so 3,000 women across the state. And our basic criteria was that they should be regular bus users. At least a couple of times a week, 2 to 3 times minimum, they should be using the bus. What was not surprising was that they saved money. Clearly, obviously. If you don't have to pay for a ticket, you're saving some money. But what was interesting was how it has changed how they travel, how they use the bus, what they use the bus for, how it has opened certain doors for them, which earlier, for various reasons, were not, spaces were not accessible. So I think that was where the really interesting stuff was. The saving and what they used the money saved was not surprising. Because, if you look in the development sector and you work in that space, there is an understanding that when you invest in women, you invest in society, right? I think it's the UN which said that, you educate one woman, you educate the village or something along those lines, right? So there is that concept. So we figured, and it was true, that they invest back in their family's health, their nutrition, the children's education, that kind of stuff. So that was unsurprising. But the other stuff on how they travel, why they travel, where they go, those things was interesting. In fact, afterwards, I was like, oh, we should have asked these other questions as well, because, it got us thinking beyond.
When you talked to these women and you said they needed to have traveled more frequently, at least twice in a week and things like that, what do these women do, right? Where do they go?
We were trying to look at, interviewing women from different socioeconomic groups, different. So therefore, obviously, the kind of work they do would also vary. But at the same time, if you look at who uses public transport in a country like India, the vast majority are, people who are socioeconomically deprived, right? Obviously the well-to-do are not using public transport. Maybe the occasional metro ride, but by and large, and definitely bus is the poor person's mobility option. So we knew that we are unlikely to get, rich people in the bus. But we did look at the kind of women you got, middle class, lower middle class, low income groups. This was the kind we got. So we had about 1,000 of them who were not formally employed outside the house. So, if you want to call them homemakers or whatever. Then there were people who were working as labor or in some form of informal sector. They may be municipal corporation workers or, various things like that. And then, of course, people doing office jobs, right? White collar type of jobs as well. So you had the whole range of that. And we were also looking at covering different age groups. So we had a few students. We tried not to focus on students because students anyway have student concessions and it's a little different for them. And of course, we wanted to look at people who are retired senior citizens. So we wanted to cover that variation as well.
So what are the standout stories that come across, right? You said they do invest back in the family. So 800 rupees is what, up to 800 rupees is what some people's saved by doing this. And obviously, that goes a long way for people like this, right? I mean, they are not getting a lot of money, they are not well to do, so they can't consider this a frivolous thing. For them, this is quite substantial and important. So, what did they say when they got this saving? How did they feel about it?
The overwhelming reaction from the women was that this was a scheme that really helped them. They liked it. They appreciated what it did for them. And like you say, 800 rupees per month, was substantial for them, because as a family, they're earning less than 20,000 a month. And therefore, 800 is a good amount of money. And when it comes to women, that money then is something that they can save and use for the household, for the family, for extra stuff, right? So it definitely was something that they all felt was extremely valuable for them. And they spent it largely on the household. It could be whatever they needed for the household, a little more than they would have, budgeted for. They would spend nutrition, healthcare, and education of children. If they felt the child needed some extra tuition or whatever, a little bit that, more books, access to something. So those were the things they were spending on.
But obviously this comes with its own backlash, right? You mentioned this right up front, is that people felt this is a freebie and this is coming at the cost of the Exchequer. And these kind of stories I've heard here as well. There are two things. One is why should women be given a freebie or some such thing by most probably the men, right? That's one way of looking at it. Why do the men feel that women should not be given? Did you hear that often, and how do you think about it?
Yeah, we heard that. So we interviewed a few men as well, not as many as women, but a few men. And definitely this was, very prevalent in the public narrative on social media and so on and so forth. And even with men within the development sector who we know, who are colleagues in the larger sense that we work with, and they would say these things. And then, that's really what got us thinking about this. And yes, the main point was that why are the women getting a freebie? Why only the women? Two, so that means I am paying for you, right? The man is paying for the woman's ticket. And I am, as a man, the hard-earning breadwinner, doing all the hard work, and then I have to pay for your ticket. So there was definitely that sort of tone to the language that they felt it was unfair. And then, of course, as a larger narrative, they would say, this money is public money, and public transport corporations are already in the red, which is true. And, this is only going to make that worse. Our public bus transport corporations will go further into the red. So how is this a good thing? So this was definitely the pushback. And the other interesting thing, which also got us thinking on a line of thought, which opened up very interesting conversations with the women, was that so one of the men told us in Tamil, saying that they will, the women will step out with no purpose and they will roam without any, for no good reason. And that's obviously in his mind a bad thing, So then that started a very animated discussion within, CAG, that why is that wrong? Men loiter in public spaces all the time. It's perfectly normal to walk down a street and at the local chai shop, there will be 5 men drinking, smoking a cigarette, discussing whatever. But women, no, you can't do that, right? So as a woman, any time of the day, if I'm just standing on the roadside, you will suddenly feel like some 10 people are just watching you and wondering why you're standing there without a purpose. So that larger question, which has been discussed as a women's safety and use of public space and how they interact in public spaces by other people. There's that like that Pinjara Tod and Why Loiter and, those groups in the north who have done a lot of talk around this. So we kind of wanted to bring that into the perspective as well and say, by giving free tickets, free travel options, has it allowed women to, step out and roam aimlessly? And if so, what are they doing by roaming aimlessly? And how has that changed how they access and use and interact with the public spaces in our city?
So were the women you found out of the 3,000 actually loitering, or were they going to work and doing something useful?
Well, for the most part, they were all, running errands or working. For a number of women, they said it all allowed them to access jobs which they earlier couldn't. For example, there's always a societal and familial sort of barrier on where women can go and work, and there's no good transport options. Why do you want to go there? Find something which is down the road, even though it pays much less. So they would have to make these compromises. And because, of course, travel takes a chunk of time in your day. So then, if you have to drop the kids, pick up the kids, take the elderly person at home, for whatever, for healthcare, you have to fit all that into your routine. And then if you don't have a great transport option, then adding work into it, the work is, the job is the first thing which gets cut, because these other domestic duties are considered paramount. So for some women, they were now able to say, look, the bus is free and there's a direct bus where I want to go. And the people down the road, my friends, are also thinking to work in the same place. So, we're just going to go do this and we're going to bring more money in for the family. And they basically said it helped them counter the arguments at home and push back and give them the freedom to go find a job that they wanted to get, So there's one is a little more financial independence, but it's also, if you think about it, the independence and the strength for you to claim your own, space within family and society and be like, I need to be counted. What I think is important and what I want is also important has to be considered. So give them that courage to step up and step out, right? I think it has helped. I mean, we didn't quantify that, but certainly the women indicated that. So yes, finding jobs which they wanted to do. For a lot of women who don't work outside the home, who work obviously inside unpaid labor, they said it saved them time. So in the past, many of them, if they had to run an errand, it was 3 kilometers away, they would walk. Because they would want to save on spending for transport. And if it's only a couple of kilometers, they'd walk it. Now they take the free bus, it saves them time and energy, obviously. And they find it easier to run errands because of that. And this was another aspect that we wanted to highlight, was that women typically do a lot of small, short trips, trip chaining, right? So they go out, they drop the child, then they run an errand, then they might do, if they work outside, they may go work. On the way home, they'll run another 3 errands, pick up the kid and come. And each of those stops requires you to take a different bus. And if you look at how traditionally fare is structured in our public transport, you pay more if you do a lot of short trips versus one long trip. So the man goes to office and comes back. He may be doing 10 kilometers to office, 10 kilometers back. But that's just one fare amount. And because it's 10 kilometers, it's cheaper. She may be also doing 10 kilometers, but she hops off every 2 kilometers and switches a bus, right? So per kilometer, the cost is actually more for her. But why? What is the logic in doing that, right? You are penalizing somebody for using the public transport more. By taking 5 trips, 6 trips, she's paying more. So, how does that, so by giving them this free bus, all of these little barriers have been reduced a little bit. Not completely, but things have eased up a little bit for the women.
So there are lots of benefits. It comes back to how we have been thinking about this. One is this entitlement by the men and the patriarchal attitude of what women should do and shouldn't do. And somehow the fact that they shouldn't be paying for the women, even though we know that the women's workforce participation is lower and the economy only gets better when they come into the workforce. But what I realize with these kind of schemes is, one, the exchequer is not really losing the money. It's actually going, since this is a state-run institution, it is actually transferring hands into another entity of the state, which you are anyway running out of the taxpayers' money. And one of the reason tax you pay is to deliver certain kind of these welfare services, right? Like education, health. And this is one of the things that directly contributes to, instead of giving 800 rupees to someone as cash, you are giving it in kind. And transportation is critical to connecting and doing errands. And I feel that we need to learn how to balance this argument of what is a freebie and what is not. Thought I saw that in your report. There is need for further study on some of these items. Do you think this is something that is useful to consider? Because I'm still looking to see that every 800 rupees that is pumped into these hands need not necessarily be economically quantified only as a job term, but it is actually helping pay for food and other things. Instead of giving them cash, you're giving it to them indirectly, right?
Absolutely. Our study is just the tip of the iceberg. Again, it's only 3,000 women when you look at the total number of women in Tamil Nadu. And then if you're looking at the number of women across the country in multiple states who are benefiting, so there's much more to be done. But even in terms of like you say, where's the money coming from and where's it going and who's it benefiting in the long run? So we've made the argument that if the women are investing in their family, in their nutrition and health and their future, then you're investing in the country, right? Their kids are getting better nutrition, better education, or some additional educational support of some kind. So therefore, that is the kids' future, better jobs, better, hopefully greater contribution into the GDP, right? And we like to measure everything by GDP, so that should be a plus. In terms of nutrition and healthcare, if I'm getting, as a family, right, I have better food, better quality food, I'm less likely to fall ill and therefore less likely to need that medical attention, right? And considering these are the kind of people who will depend on the state for healthcare, they are going to government hospitals by and large, right? So, which means the burden on the state comes down again. They will not be running for minor things, and hopefully they won't have any major things, but, they will not need that support. And considering that our healthcare budget is so, is inadequate, even in a state like Tamil Nadu, which is one of the better states in these aspects, we need to spend more on healthcare. And considering, climate change and all the other issues that we are seeing, COVID, now you're going to get more such diseases, new diseases, which we don't know what to do with, disasters. Those are things that we need to invest in as a society, right? To climate proof ourselves, to be more resilient, to be able to deal with it with less loss of human life and property. And if we can save a little bit here, that money could go to something else, right? Which will again benefit all of us collectively. So we are investing in our own future by doing this.
Yep.
And as for the State Transport Corporation in Tamil Nadu, the state government is paying the STU 16 rupees per zero value ticket issue. So in fact, in Chennai, the MD of the MTC, who was there for our report launch, he clearly said, it's not a revenue loss for us. Of course, it's still public money. It's still taxpayer money. But we also have to remember that taxes are not just income taxes. There are lots of other taxes that we pay. When you buy a product or a service, you're paying a tax as well. So the women who may not be earning outside the house are still paying taxes.
Yeah.
So this fallacy of I'm the hardworking, tax-paying citizen, and then you're, getting a freebie off me is also problematic in a very practical, reality check, fact check way.
Like I said, it has benefits when you put it in public transport and you're helping a bunch of people get access to other opportunities. But the service itself, I noticed that in your survey, some people in Tamil Nadu, the only the ordinary bus service. I think it is the same here as well. The Volvos you don't get the benefit of free if you're in certain other buses, and I think it's the same. Some deluxe and other services are not free for women. There are two observations you did make, that the women were willing to wait. Quite a few women were willing to wait for the ordinary bus service and take the free service. And the second thing is that they felt that there could be more buses made available so they could do more work and don't have to wait longer for all of these things. So, and the service itself could be improved as well. So what were your takeaways from those conversations?
So yeah, we have in Tamil Nadu, in the city buses, you have ordinary buses or whiteboard buses, lowest fare ones these are. They stop at every bus stop on the route. Then you have deluxe and express, which are slightly more expensive, stop at fewer stops. And then the AC buses, which are few in number and of course are far more expensive than anything else. And the scheme applies only to the ordinary buses. So, which is why it's called the pink bus, because the front and the back of these ordinary buses have now been painted pink for you to know that that's an ordinary free bus. So the issue is that if you look at the fleet, let's take Chennai, because that we have the numbers for. We'd filed some RTIs, and for Chennai, we got good data from the government. They have about 3,500 odd buses for Chennai. And this is not just the city, but also bits of neighboring districts. So the Chennai metropolitan area. So it covers a larger area, bits of Tiruvallur, Kanchipuram, all of these other districts which surround us. I think if you look at the central government benchmark of 60 buses per lakh population, I think Chennai is at 30 or 35 buses per lakh population. And I have to check the numbers, but something around that. So basically, we need double. We currently need 7,000 buses. Okay. When we're going to get there, by the time we get there, the city will be even bigger and we'll need 10,000 buses. So it's a long-term issue that we've had for the last 30 years, that the fleet strength is inadequate. So that is a fundamental problem irrespective of the scheme. And then what has happened is, because of the scheme, and like you were saying, the women now prefer to wait for that bus. It was interesting that even working women, who you assume have to be in office at 9 o'clock or, whatever, they were willing to wait for the free bus. We thought it would be women who don't have that kind of rigid schedules who would be okay to wait, but all of them across the board, by and large, were okay to wait. So there's a huge complaint of crowding and overcrowding in those buses, which is true. Even the women say it's now become ridiculously crowded because all the women are going on that. And then the men who normally commute on that are also commuting on that. So, everybody is annoyed by that. And in our weather, it's obviously not a fun experience. And then there is this feeling that the frequency, therefore, of the buses is poor. But from the data we got from MTC, there are a couple of things we understood. That of the 3,500 buses, nearly half are ordinary buses. So that's not a bad percentage per se. But then you have so many routes. I forget how many routes, several hundred routes. So per route, how many buses are they putting, which are ordinary buses, is one thing. It varies anywhere from one bus to 20 buses on that route. What is the length of the route? That determines frequency, obviously. And also, obviously, peak, non-peak time. You may say it's a 1 hour route, but it'll take 2 hours because of traffic. So all of those things combined, and with the fact that if you wait and then a bus comes and it's really crowded, it just adds to your idea that the frequency is poor. Right? So we don't actually know whether the frequency is poor. It might be the same as it was before, but certainly it's more crowded. So that has become an issue for everybody who uses the bus. In terms of other service benchmarks, yes, that's anyway an existing problem other than fleet strength, quality, cleanliness, the how old the buses are. On average, the bus fleet is about 9 years old now, which is really bad. They're at the end of their life. So, things are rickety, they don't work well, all of those issues are there. So that's a larger issue, irrespective of the scheme, which needs to be addressed. And yes, pretty much no bus in the bus fleet is disabled friendly.
Yeah.
So those are bigger issues which have to be addressed anyhow.
So on the narrower issue of the scheme itself, now with 5 states making that a core of their transport service, there could definitely be some tweaks that could help. What, in your opinion, could be that, other than the improving of the overall fleet for everyone? And of course, extending this was one of the things you said. Why should they be restricted to ordinary buses? Of course, the cost will not be 16 rupees. It might end up becoming 25 or 30. But on an average, if we assume that this is in the long run beneficial to the socio-economic benefits that it brings to the state, and if there is something that we are convinced is going to help, why not go all out and make it for all the buses as well, right? I mean, that's one of the things you definitely came out with. What else could be tweaked in this? One of the things you mentioned was about the data also. I think with actually having the ticket, we know exactly who's getting and how many are being sold. I think gender segregated data is what you called it, right?
So, yeah, with the data now, if you look at how our public transport collects data, what do you need the data for first? What kind of data and why do we need it? You want to know how many people are using the transport, when they're using it, where they get in, where they get off, okay, and who they are. And why do you want to know this? Because you need to know how to improve the services to maximize, the efficiency and also maximize the benefit that it reaches more people in the way that is most suited for them, right? So if you look at Metro, they have the card and it knows every time you swipe it and swipe out, it knows that, hey, Sathya has traveled from here to here on such and such a date at such and such a time, right? Even if you don't use the card, even if you're using the, pay as you go, you buy your ticket on that day, they know somebody has traveled, right? And it's time stamped and location stamped. So it's easy for them to say there's a lot of demand for trains from this station to this station, at 10 in the morning. So then do we increase the number of carriages? Do we have more trains, increase the frequency? These are things to be looked at. When it comes to buses, you have this thing called route rationalization, which they claim to do. How they do it, we don't know. And what exactly that entails. So basically, where do you want to run the buses? What are the routes? Yeah. How many buses per route? What is the frequency? Where do they start? Do you extend it to that extra 2 kilometers because there is some demand? So you need to assess the demand. You need to know who are all these people, where are they going, when are they going, what, you need all of this data. And like we discussed earlier, because women do trip chaining and their travel patterns are different from men, which is now recognized globally. It's just in the global south, not been a focus at all. You need to also have it segregated by gender. How are the women traveling? How are the men traveling? How do we ensure that all of them get the best possible public transport, system, right? So, which is why, if you look at, so even the data that the government has given us through RTI on how many women are taking the free bus, right? You don't have a baseline because pre-scheme, we don't know how many women traveled in the buses.
Correct.
So the only way to say is that, okay, the first month in 2021, when the scheme was launched, X number of women traveled. took a free bus, and then the next month X plus so much travel, and you can see that increase, okay, which is great. So more women are taking the free bus. It doesn't mean that suddenly some couple of lakh women who are not taking buses at all have jumped to buses. We still don't know that either. Though some of the women we spoke to said yes, instead of two-wheeler, they now take buses because there's an obvious saving there. But we don't know how much that shift has happened. Because again, women were traveling in other buses earlier. They might have stopped going in a deluxe bus and shifted to an ordinary bus.
Correct.
So these things, we don't have a way to quantify. Even the government doesn't have a way to quantify. Ideally, you would do surveys periodically to gather this kind of data. So really now the zero value ticket is the first piece of gender segregated data that they've got. So what they really need to do is to say, how do we take this to the next level, get even better data, and then how do we use that data to improve the services? What does that entail? What does that mean? It would not just be knowing that so many women have taken a zero value ticket. You will need to do surveys. You will need to talk to commuters and understand what are the issues. Who's trip chaining? Where are they going? When are they going? The other thing that women are penalized for in their travel pattern is, as part of the trip chaining, women also, with that very complicated travel pattern that they normally have, tend to travel more in off-peak hours when bus frequency is poor. So you're penalizing me for not commuting, taking one trip to office and one trip home at the appropriate time. If I don't travel at 9 a.m., if I'm going to travel at 12 in the afternoon, I have to wait more time. Why? How is this fair? Okay, so there's time poverty issues as well. So how are you going to bring all of these in to give a robust public transport system that reaches more people, makes it more convenient for people, encourages therefore more people to use it? And this will shift, right? It's not just people who are currently using it, but also bring in more users who otherwise will say, no, I'll take my car and go. So all of this kind of builds on, and you need the data for that.
When these political announcements were made, the bureaucracy didn't bother to collect the data beforehand and they just jumped to implement it. As a blunt instrument, it's okay to go ahead with that. But when we start addressing these nuances of how do we make it more effective, how do we collect more data around gender and make it more appropriate, like you said, this is very insightful that we are assuming the woman also behaves like the man and assume the travel pattern is going to match exactly the same. And that's a major assumption that we are making. Of course, it is also complicated by the fact that most of these transport services use stage-based ticketing, unlike a metro, instead of stop-based ticketing, and they are not able to tell exactly which stop they got off. Broadly, in this stage, between these 3-4 stops, they got off or some such thing. But I think with the electronic ticketing, which some cities have, they are trying to change some of that. It is also observed that in other countries, they have time-based ticketing as well, right? So they'll give you a 1-hour ticket and you can do how many hour hops you want. So we are not innovating on a lot of these things, no?
Yeah, we're not thinking out of the box. And really, I think the technology is there. So it's a question of how we use it and how we make the front-facing part of that technology, usable for people. See, this is another issue that we've been talking about with the government. We did another study 2 years ago where we looked at how people access and use information on public transport. So you and I will look at an app, we'll pull up, move it or whatever, and we'll look at it and be like, okay, there's a bus coming in 3 minutes, I'll just go and whatever. But the majority of people we interviewed in that study, that was only Chennai, we looked at, again, around 500 people in the city. Majority of them, though they have a smartphone, don't use it for these things. It's not their go-to option to Google up something. How do they find out about a bus for a new route, for a new place that they're going? They turn and ask the person next to them. For a lot of them, even today, if you go on a metro in India, there will be that one elderly person who will come to you and say, can you help me put this ticket into that machine? How do I use it? Who is intimidated by that turnstile or by that escalator? And that there is a considerable number of people in our country who still have these barriers, and we can't just be like, no, we're going to go tech savvy and, you have to suck it up and figure it out. You need to take them along with you, help them get over that fear and barrier. So while we can do all the tech solutions, we need to remember it's going to take another 5 to 10 years for that shift where 99% of the population is comfortable with this. There is language barriers. There's so many issues there. So when you think of it that way, you cannot be like everything is going to be a swipe card. You will still need to have cash, paper, announcements, those kind of mechanisms, right? So how do we have all of these options and still get data out of it, still make it usable and user friendly, and also make it workable for the conductor who has to deal with all of this? His job is also not easy, right? One hand, he has to give you a paper ticket, somebody else is going to swipe, he has to make sure that it's swiping correctly. How is he going to handle all of this, considering how crazy our buses can get in peak hour? It's not easy. So these are things that the government needs to start thinking out of the box and saying, how are we going to do all of this? And fare structuring, can we simplify it? So it just makes life easier for everybody all around. Well, how do we do that? What does that entail? Lots of questions. It's not going to be easy, but we need to start looking at this. And getting some good data on the ground would really, really, really help. At least make sense of what is going on out in the real world, and then how do we adapt and build.
We still make stations with such smooth flooring that we want the old people to slip and die. That's world class for us. And I feel at the end of the day, we have to think about this as the new normal of making sure that we target transportation which is affordable and free for most people, which can get us better opportunities for those targeted segments, in this case, women.
I wanted to add actually to that, because when you're saying transportation free for everybody, I think that definitely is the ideal that we should work for, that you have free public transport for all. But if you look at even today, it's not just women who get free or almost free public transport. There are a lot of concessions in most states, right? Tamil Nadu itself, we found out we have 12 other concession options. Senior citizens, students, freedom fighters, people with X amount of disability, Tamil scholars, they have a whole list. Okay. So I'm sure every state has this, right? Definitely students and senior citizens, and they probably have other ones as well. They're also getting 50%, 70%, in some cases almost 100% concession. So this is another vulnerable population, women, that you are now looking at to support. And the scheme's stated goal is social inclusion. So I think to some extent it's done that. One other thing I wanted to point out, going back to talking about the whole why loiter and pinjra tod and those things. It was very interesting that a lot of women told us that earlier they would think twice about stepping out for leisure because it would cost money to go out. And now they're like, we go out more often. Whether it's to go to a temple or a beach or a park or a mall or whatever, they are more willing to step out. And I think COVID, being locked up in our houses, really taught us the value of stepping out of our houses, right? I mean, for our mental health and happiness, it's crucial that we go out and just, whatever passes for fresh air today in our cities, but step out of the house and see some other face, which is not our family, right? You need that break. You need to go out. And for these women, it was also, a way to take the children somewhere. So it would, in fact, in the end of the day, become a family outing in some cases. So I think that has been a big takeaway. And if you think of it in a larger scale, this means more women are stepping out, means at every level, whether it's for a job or something else, more visibility in the public space, and therefore more safety in the public space for women. And therefore encouraging more women again to step out because there are so many women out there already, right? So that's a positive feedback that we might be able to see in a few years, but we would need to again sort of measure it and track it.
When you talked about this multiplicity of passes and other categories and everything else, it reminds me of one of the things also was there in your report, is that the paperwork that is being needed for some of these freebies, especially in Karnataka, you specifically mentioned that they need to fill up forms and prove domicile and all of these kind of things. Think about the amount of costs that are being added because of all these complexities. Not just that, even if you look at the ticketing machines, the apps that are being used and all of these, it's a huge amount of complexity we are building into a simple service which goes from point A to point B. Of course, how the free is crafted for people needs to be re-looked at, right? I mean, it might... Is there an abuse of something when you make it free, or is it an abuse if you travel more? I don't think so. So we have to go through a little bit of options. Like you said, is loitering an abuse of the system? I don't think so. If people are more on the outdoors, how can it be, right? So I think there's a very good case to be made for if you remove the cost of all of the complexities you put into managing the bus system, the financial system, the passes, the discounts, all of these things, I'm just saying, it might just be the easiest thing. Just run the bus, make it free for everyone. But of course, it need not be free the way we are envisioning it as a freebie. It could be that it comes out of a corpus which is being paid for separately. Anyway, the men are complaining that they are paying taxes for the women. Why don't we tell them pay a little more into a corpus which just makes it free for everyone? And we have to have a way of collecting and building that corpus. Maybe there are ideas. That would be a nice topic to consider, right? I mean, removing complexity itself might be a big tax saving, which might bring the ticket cost by a couple of rupees at least.
All STUs anywhere in the world pretty much run at a loss. Nobody's making a profit. Okay. I don't think the London Tube is making a profit. I have not heard of any case study anywhere in the world where they've made a profit. So everybody's in the red because you recognize that this is a public service. This is like PDS. This is a thing that you need to make sure reaches your citizenry, right? And mobility is important for a number of reasons. You to get education, to access healthcare, to access a job, for whatever. You need mobility today. And this is what the government has to provide. So keeping that in mind, this is a problematic conversation that people, this argument that, the STUs are in red. Yes, they're always in red. Yes, of course, they have to be more efficient. They're horrifically inefficient. Yes, definitely. But we need to plan how we are going to make them financially viable without depending on fare box revenue. Fare box revenue is only going to bring that much in. It is not going to be enough ever. Okay. Your cost of the infrastructure and of course your HR, your managing all the people who work for you within that system, their salaries and pensions and whatnot is going to be the biggest chunk, which is true of any organization if you think about it.
Sure.
So how are you planning for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? How are you budgeting for it? Just like you're budgeting for public health, for, whatever that your public money is going for. You need to budget properly for public transport. The metro is not financially viable.
Yeah.
In any city. Why are we not complaining about that? Why is it only the buses that we complain about, right? This I have a huge problem with because
so many
the cost of building a metro is much more than, building a bus system. So ideally, in fact, we should be investing more in a bus system because it reaches maximum people for less money per kilometer than a metro. Okay. And it costs less for the commuter as well, no matter what you do, even if you don't give free tickets. So why are we constantly talking about revenue instead of saying, how do you make them financially viable through other means? And what are those means? That needs to be explored and looked at very, very seriously and planned for in the long term. And I think that is one huge missing chunk which no city is doing today. And I briefly wanted to talk about Karnataka versus Tamil Nadu. So, pros and cons. Like you said, Tamil Nadu has made it very simple. Any woman, transgender, or person with disability can get into a pink bus for free.
That's it.
It doesn't require you to read a board, nothing. If you see it's painted pink in the front and the back, that's free for you. And it's easy for the conductor because he knows who to give the ticket, zero value ticket to. In Karnataka, you have to provide domicile. So when I travel in Bangalore, every time that the conductor will just keep looking at me and I'll pull out the money and then he'll look at me and I'll be like, no, I'm buying a ticket. And then he'll be like, okay. And, whereas all the other women will be pulling out these Aadhaar cards. So one major issue with this is that, like any city, Bangalore has a huge number of people who are from other states. Poor people, right? Working labor, construction labor, all sorts of jobs like that. So in a way, you're penalizing them. They are contributing to your economy. Okay, they are most deserving. They need this more than anybody else. I can pay for my ticket. They will find that saving of value. And because they don't have a domicile, some paperwork, even though they might have been living for 20 years in Karnataka for all you know, it's just that they are in an informal sector. They don't have the time, the bandwidth to go get paperwork done. They don't get that benefit. Okay, that's one problem. Two, like you said, the state itself has to invest a lot of resources in setting up the system and implementing it. And in fact, I think they postponed that smart card thing also because there's a lot of back-end stuff that they have to do. So those are issues. But what Karnataka has done that Tamil Nadu hasn't is that I think Karnataka has made it intercity as well.
Yeah.
Which anecdotally we've heard from folks has increased the mobility, the amount of movement within the state. And families are doing like more weekend trips and tourist trips and stuff. So there is a generation of revenue happening for the state through such things of, tourism and so on. So I think that's interesting that they've done that. And one would have to see what are the pluses and minuses of doing that versus the more limited scope of things in Tamil Nadu. But in a way, Tamil Nadu's made it easier for any woman. The other day, last week, I was in the bus. It was an ordinary bus coming home. And this French couple got in, tourists. And the conductor was like, zero value ticket, woman. And you, how much? And he gave him, some 10 rupee ticket. And then those two were very confused. So I was like, listen, it's free for women. And they were like, really? Then I had to explain the whole scheme. It was very funny. But, it is funny because for them, it's a drop in the ocean.
Yeah.
But it's become that it's very simple for the conductor. He just, woman, transgender, person with disability, free ticket, here you go. And you're done, So, one would need to assess all of these things and then see what tweaks would be needed to each scheme to make it better. Make it better in terms of ensuring services reach more people in a timely manner and in the manner that they require, whether it's free or otherwise.
Fair enough. Sumana, thanks for spending this time explaining. I need to do an episode on this free versus privatized bus service also. So there are lots of pros and cons, the numbers, the way you design the scheme, the way you implement it. So many things go into it. There are behavioral biases. I just want to do that. This thing has provoked me into understanding there's so many economic benefits for targeting this to women. But I'm not so sure about how do we roll this out? Universal free public transport access. What will that mean? What are the unintended consequences? It will be very interesting to delve deep into that with more people. You've given me an idea for another episode with someone I know. Maybe I should take it up with him. But wonderful report. Thanks for doing it and coming on the show and talking about it, because I was literally looking for any study which had numbers, a little bit at least, so I could make some sense of it. There are a lot of stories on newspapers. I mean, it makes sense, like I said in the beginning. but I just wanted some numbers, and this was a wonderful work. Thanks once again for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you.